So our theme for 2019-2020 is I am blank because he is God. So I am blank because he is God. And tonight I'm going to look at I am found. I am found because he is God. That's a bit of an odd one, but I like it. What does it mean to be found? And I was sort of looking at definitions, and there's kind of this assumption that in order to be found, at some point, we have to have been lost. We have to have been separated from something. We have to have not been where we're meant to be. So I looked up, I'm a bit of a nerd, that's why I do research. I looked up definitions of what it means to find something, and there's loads, absolutely loads. But three that I thought were really nice are to recover something lost, to regain the use of something, and to obtain by effort. So I hope that all of you at some point in your life have had something that is really precious to you, something that's really special. I'm going to ask if we can have a picture up on the screen. That is me as a baby, with my dad. And with the thing, my dad was very precious to me, but the thing that was most precious to me is this toy that I am holding. This is my beloved Hattie, who my dad bought for me on the day that I was born. And it's a bit washed out. I feel like this picture ages me somewhat as well. She's a pink hippo, and I loved her, and she went everywhere with me, to the point my parents were actually quite worried on my first day of school because I wasn't allowed to take her with me, and they weren't really sure how I was going to react. But because she came everywhere with me, there were quite a few times as a child where I left her in places, where I lost her for a period of time. I had a little bit of a knack of leaving her in places where she was camouflaged. I don't know if I thought that she'd fit in, so something I should probably say is that she didn't stay like a pink fluffy hippo for very long. She was so well loved that she lost all her fur and became kind of this grey blob. I do actually still have her, and I was going to bring her, but my mum said it would be embarrassing, so I didn't. So she looked a little bit like a potato. And I would periodically leave her in the pile of potatoes at the supermarket and have a meltdown on the way home when I realised I didn't have her. But perhaps my most spectacular time of losing her was on a really vast, pebbly beach. And I just put her down, and we left, and I had a proper tantrum. And I made my dad go and look for her. And he scoured this pebbly beach, he walked up and down, and according to my mum, it was hours, but he found her. He did find her, and he always did, you know? So I hope that you've all got sort of things that you might have lost that are precious to you, and it's really good when we find them, but sometimes it's not so nice. So the stories I'm going to look at for this idea of exploring the fact that I am found, that we are found, are some of the parables. So the parables are stories that Jesus used to explain kind of deep, quite complex things to people in a way that they would understand. Yeah? He would use illustrations, he would rephrase things, and through each kind of retelling, people might get a little bit more insight into what he was saying. We're going to look at three of them today. Two of them are really short, one is slightly longer, but they're collectively known as the lost parables, and it's not because they were lost at some point, but they talk about this idea of us being lost and needing to be found. And I want to kind of say that I'm not even going to scratch the surface of these. They are really rich and really deep stories. People have written huge books just on these. So if it's something that you're interested, come and ask and I can give you some recommendations. But hopefully I'm going to just tap into it a little bit and explore it with you. So the lost parables. A bit of context is that Jesus is in a situation where he's with some people who are really well respected in society, and he's with people who are not so well respected in society. And we kind of get this image that Jesus is spending a lot of time with these people who are not respected, who other people don't think are really worth his time. And they start to moan about it. They're like, why are you not spending time with us? We deserve your time. And Jesus' explanation is through these 3 stories. So the first one is the story of the lost sheep. And it starts like this. So this is Luke chapter 15, verses 4-7. Jesus says to them, "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." It's the story we were just singing about in that last song, In Reckless Love. I'm going to move straight on to the second one, and then I'm going to look at these together. So the second one is the story of the lost coin, and it follows on almost immediately. And I can kind of imagine the people he's talking to being like, "Yeah, Jesus, we get that, but..." And he's like, "Wait, I'm going to tell it another way." So Luke 8-10. "Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin.' In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." So Jesus is essentially telling the same story here, but with a different illustration. And the underlying, it doesn't take a lot to work out what the underlying message is. So quite frequently, Jesus will refer to himself as the Good Shepherd. So we can kind of make the association that perhaps the flock are his people, are humanity. And he also emphasizes that we're quite valuable, and so it could be that these coins are perhaps referring to us as well. And actually Jesus does end both of these by stating kind of what he's meaning. And if I just repeat the first one, so verse 7, "I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." So for me, the thing that really strikes me about these is that they give us such an insight into God's character. And I felt really challenged, and it highlighted to me how he is so much better than I am. And I'm not a farmer. Is anyone here a farmer? I can't actually see anyone, so there is someone at the back who's a farmer. Great. But I kind of imagine, and this might just be my personality, my husband will tell you that I don't have a lot of patience for things, but if I owned 100 sheep and one was to go missing, sure, I'd probably look for it for a little bit. I'd probably walk down to the bottom of the field. I might peer over a hedge or something. But probably after not too long, I might just kind of take it as being gone. It's 1% of my flock. It's not actually that much. And then the illustration with the coins, like even at work the other day, I was walking from a lecture that I'd just given back to my office, and in my coat pocket I've got a load of coins and my phone, and for some reason the coins like attach themselves to my phone, and if I take my phone out too quickly, then these coins sort of splay everywhere. It happens all the time. And I was in a bit of a rush, so I kind of looked around my feet, picked up the ones that I could see, but I didn't look very hard for them. And I probably did lose a coin. But the thing that this story says to us is that to God, each sheep, each coin, each person is so important, is so valuable. And like in a situation where we might take something as being lost, God is never going to stop looking. He's never going to stop looking for you. And I think the only thing that I could think of to get a little bit of an insight into what this is it's kind of sad, but like when people go missing, we get like news stories with press conferences of families just being desperate to get the people back. And I think that is just a little glimpse. I know someone who went missing about 10 years ago, and their family are still looking. They're desperate to find them. And when I was prepping this, I came to the point of thinking, I don't actually like that they're known as the lost parables. Because for me, the word lost seems quite final. It kind of seems like you're saying, this thing is gone. It's lost. And the phrase that kept coming back to me, and I don't know, it's not from me, so I feel like it must be from God, is that things can only truly be lost when we stop looking. And so I really do believe that with God, nothing can ever fully be lost, because he does want to find us. These two stories speak to a couple of the definitions of to find that I mentioned earlier, particularly to this sort of to obtain and acquire by effort. He will go to great lengths to find people. He puts everything into it. In the lost sheep story, the shepherd pays such a high price just to find the one that is lost. He leaves the rest of his flock. And that might be a bit of an irresponsible thing to do. I don't know, I'm not a farmer, but it seems a bit irresponsible. But he'll forgo the other things and other things that may seem important just to chase after one person. And no matter where we are, and importantly, even if we don't know that we're lost, a coin doesn't know that it's lost. But even if we don't know that we're lost, God is pursuing us. He's pursuing you. And when we are found, it's such a joyful thing. It's so much celebration, and it's so exciting. So I'm going to move on to the third lost parable, which is the parable of the lost son, sometimes known as the parable of the prodigal son. It's a story that lots of people are really familiar with. It was one that I was really familiar with as well. And I thought I knew it inside out. And I don't know how long ago it was, about 5 or 6 years ago, we were at New Wine. And I went to a seminar about it, and I was completely undone. It is such a powerful story. So we're in this situation, we're focused on a family, and there's 2 sons. And the youngest son asks his dad for his inheritance. And the father obliges. He divides everything between the 2 sons. And after quite a short time, the younger one decides to leave his family, take off all the money that he's been given, and he blows it all. He has a blooming good time for a really short period. But after he's blown all of it, there's a really bad famine, and he's hungry, he's lonely, and he starts to think that maybe he's made the wrong choice. He does try to kind of sustain himself for a while. He goes and gets a job feeding pigs, but it's quite labor intensive, it's quite hard, and it's just pretty miserable for him when he's starving. And so he begins to question himself. So in Luke 15, verse 17 to 20, it says, "When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." I love that image. It's one of my favorite images of God's love for us. And sometimes we do know that we're lost. We do know that maybe we've made the wrong decisions. And we're fully aware that maybe we're with the wrong group of friends, we're doing the wrong things. And whilst God is there chasing after us and wanting to be with us, there is a decision from us that needs to come, that we're actually willing to be found. The youngest son here realized that he had got himself lost. He'd made decisions which meant he was separated from his family, and he quite quickly ran out of the resources he needed to look after himself. He did make the decision to go back to his father, but he was expecting his father to reject him. He was expecting his father to say, "You are no longer part of my family," and was willing and kind of prepared with this little speech of, "I'm going to become your servant, it's fine." He felt that because of the decisions that he'd made, that he was no longer worthy of his father's love, that he was no longer worthy to be called son. But in God's eyes, our value doesn't change. It doesn't matter what we do, we are still as valuable to God. I think this is why I quite like the coin story, because in the coin story, the coin has the same value once it's been found as it had before it was lost. It's still the same coin. And in the lost son story, the father has no intention of making his son a servant. And in the last couple of verses I read, the father actually did something really significant in those times. And it was this kind of image that struck me when I was completely undone by the story, and the fact that in those times it was really undignified for a man to run. It was really undignified for someone of his kind of place in society to make that move. And he would have had clothes right down to his feet, and he picked them up and he ran to his son. He was so excited that his son was coming home, that he had found him. So if we return into that story, the son has now got back to his father, and in verses 21 to 24, he says to his dad, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." So he's done the bit that he rehearsed before he got there. But his father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it." In the Message version, it says barbecued beef. "Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And so they began to celebrate. "This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they begin to celebrate. For the son returning to his father, the father wants to give him his best. He says, "Bring the best clothes, give him a ring." And this is another thing that's specific to the time. So like for us, how wedding rings are quite significant and they illustrate something. In those times, this kind of ring was a sign of authority. It was a bit like a signet ring. And the father giving it to his son meant that he was saying, "You have as much authority to be in this family as I do." Now the story does go on, and understandably, there's an older son in this story too, who didn't run away, who'd stayed loyal to his father, who'd carried on working. And the oldest son would probably be expected to have the authority over his brother. He would have technically been the heir compared to his younger brother. So he's angry about what his dad's done and doesn't really understand it. So he confronts him. But his dad's response at the very end of Luke 15 says this, so verses 31 to 32. "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So I shared about my situation of losing Hattie as a child and the devastation that came, but I was so happy when I had her back. And I've not actually lost anything particularly precious as an adult, not a material thing anyway. But there's something about losing something and then finding it that when you lose something, you realize how valuable something is. You realize how precious it is. And once you have it back, you treasure it. You keep it close to you. And I think it's really important that we recognize how valuable we are to God. And it's a point I touched on earlier. It's this idea that it kind of requires a two-way thing. So God is chasing after us. God is looking for us. But we have to be willing to be found. It's really easy to go about life still making the wrong decisions, still going down the wrong path. So we need to make this choice to say, I am with you. I am living life with you. I'm living the life you want me to live. And it requires us to recognize that we're forgiven, that God forgives everything. We had a great talk at church this morning, and sometimes the simplest statements say it all. And just to quote my vicar, we need to accept that God's forgiveness is always enough. God's forgiveness is always enough. So while the essence of these stories, of these lost parables, is all the same, so that we've got the sheep, we've got the coin, we've got the son, I think they represent different people. And they represent people who are in slightly different situations. So we've got the sheep. Now, when a sheep gets lost, it knows that it's lost. I love walking, and I quite often go on walks around fields and stuff, and you know if a sheep has gone missing because you can hear it shouting, and you can hear the others shouting. I did write that I was going to do an impression, but I'm not. I don't know if I can. Meh. No. But the thing with a sheep is that it's helpless. It can't help itself. It can't get itself back. It requires the shepherd. And in the same way, lots of people do recognize that they're lost, but they just don't know how to get back. They don't know what to do, and they need to be pointed in the direction of Jesus. And for the coin, and for my toy Hattie, it's an inanimate object. It has no feelings. It doesn't know that it's lost. It doesn't know that it's valuable, but the fact that it's missing is felt so strongly by the person who owns it. I do actually think the lady in the coin story is a little bit of a loser. Like, I don't know if I'd be that happy if I found a coin, but sorry. There are people out there just getting on with their lives, and they have no idea about who God is. They have no idea about the life that they're missing. They think they're perfectly happy with what they've got, and they just have no concept that there is a much better way of living for them. And then we've got the son, the youngest son, who's made some bad decisions, meaning he ran away, he took the wrong path, he's away from where he's meant to be. And he's got to the point of wanting to go back. He has this longing to be reunited with his family, but he doesn't think he can. He thinks he's in too deep. He thinks he's gone too far. But God's forgiveness is always enough. And then actually, something that's often overlooked is this older son, who actually in his own way is also lost. He was adamant that the way he needed to earn his father's love, he stayed, he worked, and his kind of justification to his father for being annoyed with him was that I've stayed with you, I have been loyal to you, I have worked really hard for you. But that's not what was important to his Father. And in the same way, God loves us for who we are and not for what we do or what we have done.